Welcome to the Think Yourself Healthy podcast, where you meet the intersection of mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Heather Duranja, founder of Nutrition Vixen, registered dietitian, nutritionist, personal trainer, and cognitive behavioral specialist. I'm a mother, author, self-improvement junkie, and recovering perfectionist turned professional half-asser. Each week, I'll be bringing on a guest or a topic that will help you go from surviving to thriving. Are you with me? All right, here we go with today's episode. Hello, everybody. On today's show, Think Yourself Healthy podcast, I have a special guest, Dr. Nicole LePera. She was trained in clinical psychology at Cornell University and New School. She also studied at the Philadelphia School of Psychoanalysis. She is a holistic psychologist whose work addresses the connection between the mind and body and incorporates nutrition, lifestyle, and psychological wellness practices. She is the creator of the movement Self-Healers, where people from around the world are joining together in community to take healing into their own hands. Oh my gosh, what an accolade. As I mentioned earlier, this is just such a very special moment for me to have an opportunity to chat with you and address some of the philosophies and main principles that I have built my practice from. There's so much that we can chat about, and I'm going to do my best to try and really get to the important things that I want to discuss. I started my journey a little over 25 years ago with the diagnosis of a chronic kidney disease. At that time, I couldn't get health insurance and was told I was going to need dialysis or transplant within the next 5 years. And so not having health insurance, I had just had a small child. Those weren't options for me. So that's where I kind of had to become my own advocate for my health and wellness and start doing research on my own. I graduated high school with a 1.7 GPA. So I was labeled learning disability and really did not have the confidence that I was going to be able to figure this out on my own. And I've had a long journey over the last 25 years, but most importantly, I have just bought years and years of quality to my life through lifestyle changes. And for me, the real last part of the leg of the journey where I got the most out of the experience was really diving in and addressing the traumas and the inner child issues that developed at such a young age. As I mentioned earlier, I was diagnosed learning disability. I started kindergarten like literally 3 days after my 4th birthday. I wasn't developmentally ready for kindergarten, and I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional home where my family just didn't have the ability to spend the extra time and afford the resources that I truly needed to be developmentally with everyone else. So I've had to overcome a lot of stories and narratives and things that I have told myself. So when I decided, I guess I was going to be turning 30, I decided that I wanted to go back and pursue an education. And honestly, this was the most frightening thing for me when I decided to, basically want to do what I had done for myself with other people. And when I found out it was a pre-med degree, I was like, yeah, so this isn't going to work, but I was so determined. I had to work through those stories, and it was the best thing I could have ever done for myself. And I ended up graduating undergrad summa cum laude, so blew all the stories, out of the
incredible.
So I'm a firm believer in undoing programming and narrative and that self-talk. Like, girlfriend, we can go there. I've done it all. I have been the epitome of the biggest self-hater, and now I embrace self-love. But again, my whole point with this story is that I went through this long 25-year journey, and for me, the real impact was starting with the traumas and the inner child work. So I kind of like to reverse engineer with individuals the journey that I've gone through. Let's start with where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And I find that this is where most people have resistance. They do not want to do the work.
Yeah.
So let's chat about that. Why is it so difficult for individuals? We're so desperate for change. We're so desperate to be healthy and be better and, living our best lives. So why is it that we are completely incapable of taking that first step towards sustainably making that journey happen for ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely, Heather. And I first want to thank you for having the conversation with me today and for putting your work out in the world, because I'm hearing such resonance with my own story. And I truly believe that the more of us that feel empowered to share our stories, which for you and me are now stories of transformation, of healing, right? Down to the core self, of kind of going back to what I believe is that kind of pure state of being that all of us, for one reason or another, and I'll go into all of this in a minute, but become separate from, become disconnected from. Mm-hmm. And for me, very similar to you, I had all of my stories. I had all of the lanes in which I thought my life had to exist.
Right.
For genetic reasons, for, I had this characteristic or personality trait and not this one, that's unchangeable, or so I thought.
Right.
So by the time, similar to you, I was entering my 30s, I thought that I was stuck. Mm-hmm. And I say that word very emphatically, very particularly, intentionally, because that is a word that I started to see and feel. By this time, I had a private practice. I was living in Philadelphia. I was being the therapist that I always thought I wanted to be, with clients coming in week after week and doing talk therapy. And I was starting to see that they were stuck too.
Yeah.
And I really began to call into question, kind of why are we so stuck? Because this isn't to say, and I fancied myself a self-aware person, right? I thought I saw my roadblocks. I thought I even formulated the new thing I would do next, the next time the same thing happened, similar to the work I was doing with very insightful clients.
Right.
Yet the question kept coming in my face, literally week after week, where I would, in my own life, see myself repeat that same pattern, even though I knew better, and I'd say to my clients, why is it, right, that we had this amazingly insightful session last Tuesday, and we really planned for this next argument, say with your partner, yet by the next Tuesday, you're reporting the same thing.
Right.
So not only is that problematic as far as I saw it, right, being in the quote unquote business, right, of helping people change or transform, get better, right? That's what I thought I was there to do. So not only, right, were they not getting better, but what I also started to see, and the reason why I'm going to share with you the why in a second. I talk all about the whys, because there's always a why that usually is entrenched in our physiology or our evolutionary being, right? 'Cause that's what we are as humans, right? A lot of shame.
Yeah.
A lot of what the hell is wrong with me, right? Why am I so stuck? I must be broken.
Yeah.
I thought that, right? So I thought I was, again, stuck in that lane because I'm broken. So I can only see health or life in this very constricted way. So again, it was till I really hit a bottom, so to speak, right? A dark night of the soul where everything seemed to be coming crashing down around me, even though outwardly my life looked like I was doing great. And I was great at pretending I was doing great too.
Yeah.
I was so good at that. And it got to the point of I couldn't pretend anymore. I was starting to have physical symptoms. I was starting to faint out of nowhere. I would just lose consciousness. And all of this crazy, scary symptoms, which inspired me. First, I thought it was an attempt to diagnose myself. So I went online, going to find that cataclysmic diagnosis that can now explain why this new batch of symptoms are coming my way. And what I was met with was an open door, was a whole new world to talk about lifestyle changes and epigenetics and the fact that maybe these things aren't as set as we thought they were. So then, similar to you, flash forward a lot of time, a lot of effort in daily consistent healing tools that I talk about now daily, I created change. So why are we stuck? Let's just go back quickly to that. Why are we stuck? The reason I've learned that we're stuck is because a part of the mind, so just to differentiate, we have the brain, it's the organ, it's inside our skulls, right? The mind, or so I really simply describe it. All the things we do with it, the thinking, all of the cognitive faculties, that's the mind, like brain in action. There's a part of the mind that is called the subconscious. Now, you might be surprised, anyone listening, to hear that we didn't really hear about the subconscious in my 7 years of school, 7+ years of training, not really covered. Really big problem.
Right.
Because what I've come to learn lives in that subconscious. I'm going to use a computer analogy that I'm sure listeners. So in that subconscious lives programs. And the reality of humans we are so patterned. So we have, and again, I'm really simplifying this, Heather, right? We have our daily behavioral programs, our habits, the things we do. If you spend some time watching, observing yourself, like I talk about, you will see how habitual you are. Even if you intend to be doing other things with your time, say, you're not. You're doing the same thing, say, after day. Another aspect, and this is where, like you said, narrative stories comes into play. We, first and foremost, this is news for some people, we have thoughts going through our mind all day long. Some of us are so identified with the thought, we become the thought. We don't know that there's a separation. When we finally discover that, I'm viewing these stories that my mind is telling me all day long, we then come to find how goddamn habitual they are. And they do fall into certain narratives or scripts. We say the same things about ourselves, about our relationships, our place in the world, our past, our present, our future, the list goes on.
Right.
Another way we are so habitual is our thoughts are connected to then how we feel. We all know this. If you think a thought long enough, I love to think stressful thoughts. That was my anxiety, was my feeling. I knew that. So I don't know about you. I can sit on a couch and worry, think worry thoughts. And before I know it, my shoulders are constricted, right? I'm feeling that tightness of anxiety. And if I'm really going to town on it, I might even start to have panic type symptoms. Meanwhile, you look around and I'm sitting quietly on a couch, right? So our thoughts connect with how our body feels.
Yes.
And we become very habitual in that. We tend to fall upon the same emotion. So if, again, don't believe me, I never want people to believe it for me or just take my story and overlay it. Go look, see if you find the same feelings. Okay, so why does this matter? When we wake up each and every day, unless we practice being conscious, practice existing from a different, quite literal part of our mind, our brain, we fall into those programs. I think the percentage now is 98% of our day, say, whatever it is, a very large percentage of our day.
Yes.
We're letting those autopilot run our life.
Right.
Okay, so fine. Maybe I'm someone listening and I see all of my habits and my patterns, right? And I know what I want to do differently, myself, all of my clients. Why can't I?
Right.
Because our subconscious is evolutionarily geared with the number one intention is to keep us safe, right? Now this sounds counterintuitive because some of our habits actually don't keep us safe at all. They actually put us or, kind of result in us being in harmful situations. Relationships are a big time one, right? We keep finding ourselves in unhealthy, and that, there's a very big range of how unhealthy we could find ourselves gravitating for those relationships. So safety only in the language of our subconscious is connected to familiar. That's it. Because we've been down that path before. And even if it's a negative consequence, we know what that's going to be next. Okay, so flash forward now. You and I have had this great therapy session, right? We're talking from now that conscious part of our brain. I know what I'm going to do next. When I go to, when that thing triggers me about my partner, in that moment, when I try to do something new, it registers on my subconscious as being unfamiliar, possibly unsafe. What happens next, I don't know. And that's one of the least tolerable things, uncertainty, that us humans can be in, that feeling.
Right.
So we then feel uncomfortable. And before we know it, we're right back in that old pattern, in that old rut. We're right back stuck.
Right. So is that where you would say cognitive dissonance comes in, where we try to formulate a new belief and then the subconscious comes in and just immediately takes over because it's such an unfamiliar and uncomfortable idea, because it literally rejects the identity that we have based our sole purpose upon? That thought comes in and then immediately we want to reject that thought, and then we defend, like we literally just spend an entire lifetime defending these thoughts that were never initially our own to begin with. And I think,
yes,
I love it I love everything you're saying, because this is exactly what I have built the practice upon. I started practicing clinically as a dietitian, working with diabetes education. And like you said, week after week, I would pour my heart and soul and all of this amazing knowledge and information and solutions. And then the following week, they'd come back and they would not make any change. And I was like, what the fuck? I cannot spend the rest of my life doing this. This is not what I thought I was signing up for. And so that's when I started looking deeper into things and realizing ultimately it's not lack of education. We have more resources available to us. It's definitely not lack of education. It goes so much deeper than that. And for me personally, I felt that it was, especially when it comes to like our lifestyle behaviors that impact our overall health and well-being, that these are driven by emotional reaction. The emotion is what triggers whatever comes next with the behavior. And that's when I decided I needed to go and get a master's and dive more into the psychology part and really be able to incorporate the mind and the body and understand how they work in unison. So for me, I have literally dedicated my entire practice to thoughts and how our thoughts stimulate the behavior. They're the very predictor of what our total overall health outcomes are going to be based on that thought. And so, as you mentioned earlier, you know, I was a chronic worrier. I didn't realize how addicted I was to drama. I was that person who was like, I fucking hate drama. I can't deal with this drama. And then I'm on the phone with my girlfriends and I'm like, you're not going to believe what just fucking happened. And then I realized, holy shit, I am literally triggering a chemical reaction in my body every time I tell this story. And I am becoming more and more addicted to the drama than I even realized. And so when I guess probably about 5 years ago, I was like, you know what? I'm really done with this. And that's when I had to really dive headfirst into all of the areas that I had the most resistance, positive affirmation, changing my self-dialogue, just being mindful and trying to have awareness around what my behavior patterns actually were. And I find that a lot of people, I know for myself, journaling. I resisted journaling so bad. Fuck that. I was not going to sit there and actually sit with the journal and put the thoughts on a paper. And I started thinking deeper into that. Why did I have so much resistance to journaling? And what I was able to come up with is that I recognized I'm a terrible speller, okay? Because I got diagnosed with learning disability at such a young age, and every time I was called on in class to read out loud, my peers would be like, oh God, no, you know, and so all of these stories were still circulating in my head. So when it came to journaling and I would pull out that piece of paper, I would start judging myself based on the stories that I had heard over my lifetime. And I was physically incapable of putting anything to the paper because I was scared I was going to misspell it. I was scared it was not going to be proper sentence structure, or I would use the wrong word out of context. And then I realized this is for fucking me. Who cares? It doesn't matter, right? But I feel like there's a lot of people who just can't get to that place. So what are your thoughts around that? How would you encourage someone who was in a similar situation? How do you get started?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to kind of acknowledge why that is. So the way I define, at least, belief, right, in a very simple, I really simplify definition, a belief is a practice thought, right? So it's this, to use your example that I really appreciate you sharing, right, back at a time and a place, events happened, right? And you, like actual things you were maybe told directly or indirectly, you got that grade. School is where a lot of this is formed for a lot of us in our immediate family environments and in school, where we get these messages about how we are. I highlight school because we're actually ranked. You know, we have objective markers, things called report cards, and then obviously how that gets treated if we're positive or negative in terms of that. So, right. So something happened, and then there's a part of the brain. So the more the thing happens, the more you can rehearse the thought. There's another part of the brain that kind of solidifies our belief. And this is why it's so hard to change. And then I'll talk about how we find our way out. there's a part of the mind that's called the reticular activating system,
Mhm.
right? I call it our mind's filter.
Okay.
Because to be a human and to take in all the stimulation in this 1 second that I'm speaking to you, there's far more happening in my current environment than I can pay attention to.
Right.
So my mind, each of our minds, has to figure for ourselves, right? There's like an algorithm, back to that computer, right? With what's important, right? What applies to me, so that I can kind of ignore, if you will, the rest of the stimulation so I don't overwhelm. And what it then does is the beliefs, right? The more practice the thought is, the more it applies to you, right? So now we begin to filter out in our environment, possibly, so using your example again, maybe there was other information available to you. Maybe there was moments in school where you were doing something positive, right? But for you, I'm just going to say like bad at school, maybe as the most simple narrative, right? Maybe not smart, maybe when I apply that didn't apply because that's not who you are. So before we know it, we delete from our very experience any opportunity to challenge our beliefs. And we just become a self-confirming machine.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. This is why for a very long time, I didn't resonate with affirmations. I'm like, okay, right. If I just say, I'm smart, I don't believe that.
Right.
And this is a big reason why, because we are staying locked, we're staying stuck in our belief. So another big issue and why change is hard to maintain, back to this concept of unfamiliar, any step in that unfamiliar direction feels unsafe, right? Feels uncomfortable. It's not to say that it is.
Right.
What a lot of us try to do, especially because when we're in that low, when we decide we want to change, usually we feel some version of shitty, sometimes really shitty.
Yeah.
And it's really natural then to want to feel better as quick as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So we shoot ourselves in the foot sometimes when I wake up the next day and I say, okay, well, here's 4 new things that I want to do different tomorrow. We overwhelm. Yeah. So the way to create change is I use a concept called small daily promise. Really the important concept is the smallness of it.
Right.
Is picking one small new thing, not those 5, right, that's almost so small that you want to diminish yourself for even doing it. But don't do that. And then do that consistently. And then upon that foundation, build another small new habit. And like I said, that will help us. This is already going to be uncomfortable. We're going to have to use the word that I use, that you used to, resistance along the way. It's going to be uncomfortable, but we can set ourselves up to succeed, because what is important is not doing 5 new things for 5 days. It's doing 1 new thing for 3 months.
Right.
Now I have a habit, and then I can build on another habit. Right. Change comes when we create new habits, because what are habits? Back to what we just started talking about in the beginning, a way of being. Yeah. And now before I know it, 6 months, 6 years later, when I look at my patterns, I am a different human, because I have different behavioral patterns. Right. I likely have different thoughts. If again, one of my consistent practices was practicing a new thought for long enough that I can open up my RAS to let in some new information. And then, 6 years from now, now I have a new belief, and now I feel different. And all of this happens gradually. So my first 2 suggestions are always going to be, become conscious of yourself. Just watch, notice all of the ways that your habit self is keeping you stuck. Notice, and then just create 1 new shift and change that you can maintain consistently.
So what I find personally is that when I make that recommendation to individuals, observe, just watch. What I find is that we are so disconnected from ourselves that we don't even have the ability to become aware in many circumstances. We are so distracted intentionally, and we don't even realize that that's what we're doing. In order to stay in this coexistence of just just gunk, right? This gunk place. So how do you encourage someone? So for someone who is so disconnected from themselves, they have no idea where to get started with observing, how do they do it?
Yeah, well, I can speak to past me, because I spent 3 decades, almost 30 years, in what we call a state of dissociation, complete disconnection from my body, from my feelings. I lovingly call it my spaceship I used to live on. And I was really good at existing on that spaceship in a complete state of disconnect and relating to other people and being here and being present to someone else and their experience. I got so attuned to how everyone else was thinking, feeling, doing. That's why I'm quite good at understanding people, but I was quite bad at understanding myself because I was quite disconnected. So I'm speaking to old me. So unfortunately, and when I have a virtual membership and the work each and every month, I remind people the first stage always is this observation, not to rush past that, because that's developing life and consciousness. And many of us are dissociated like I was. So I spent, before I could do the work that I really knew was going to help, the deeper stuff that we want to do, the thing that we think is going to make us better ultimately, maybe it's the inner child work or whatever the next step is, I had to hit pause. I spent a significant time, years, becoming conscious, or my intention. So I too am very resistant to journaling, but I created a journaling method called future self journaling, which is every day you state a daily intention to do something different. And if you look at my journals for the better part of that first year that I was healing, all I worked on, talk about repetitive, boring ass shit. Every morning, I am conscious. I use my breath as my anchor. When I discover my attention is elsewhere, I bring it back to the current moment. And then I put my journal down and I don't think it to be magic. And then I go practice that. Every moment, every day. And then some days I don't because I forget and I go back into autopilot. And then when I remember, I practice again. And until we form that basis of conscious living, you're right, we can't see. Because the things that we want to change are typically the things that, like, what our reactions when we're, I'm going to say triggered when we're activated, right? That's when we lose the most control. When I'm feeling, I know for me, it's a slippery slope. I actually lose, I kind of go unconscious as I say it. I lose my conscious opportunity in that moment. That's what we really want to change. And that's why we can't, because to be able to set ourselves up for success in that really pivotal emotional moment, we have to know how to maintain our consciousness and that observation along the way. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen overnight. So the simple answer is, if you're listening and you're struggling to be conscious, you don't know your patterns, or maybe you're dissociated, or maybe you're listening to me speak and so one of the symptoms of dissociation, and I talk about this a lot, I have no memories of childhood. I cannot go back and replay what my childhood looked like or felt like for me. That's okay, because I was a living memory. That's one of the symptoms. I shared that one very readily because I used to think something was wrong with me because I had no memory. And the more I talk about it and understand it, I now see it as a function of that dissociation, and a lot of people relate to it. Right. So we have to build that consciousness habit first. So that means hitting pause, right? And learning, whether it's sitting with yourself when your eyes are closed in what we call meditation, and learning how to just be present in our bodies and separate from our thoughts, and then translating that skill day in and day out. And that's how we build that foundation to create the change that we really want later.
Yeah. I love that. It's so on point. And I hate to use the word simple, but the reality is I feel like it's so much more simple than we want to make it. We try to overcomplicate things to keep it challenging so that we can self-betray and then call back in all of our, shame and guilt and anger and, it just goes on.
A lot of reasons. And in practice, I will be the first to attest to, it is the farthest from simple. It's one of the most incredibly difficult things to live consciously. Because then, like you said earlier, we're not distracted. We are present to everything that's in the given moment, including some darker, uncomfortable feelings. And I know that my spaceship was really helpful. It kept me away from not only the negative things, but the flip side of that, which I started to realize, the positives as well. Right. So I was just disconnected from life. And I believe that was a large contributor to that dark night, to feel so just nothing.
Right.
Like I said earlier, I had this life I was gazing upon. I'm like, wow, a lot of people in my thing would be living somewhat comfortably and maybe even, dare I say, happy. And I wasn't. And I'm not alone in that. And so when we distract ourselves from negative emotions, we have to understand that we are probably likely also distracted and disconnected then from positive ones too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for pointing that out. As you mentioned in the beginning of our podcast, physical symptoms. So what I have discovered, not only through personal experience, but through working with other clients, and I work with very high risk autoimmune disease, specifically women. The more complicated the circumstance, the more I enjoy it, because it's all interconnected, right? It's all interconnected. And so what I have discovered is that the more disconnected we are, going around in our little spaceships and, just minding everyone's business but our own, what I have discovered is that the body physically starts presenting ailments to try and get our attention. And we just continuously ignore all of the red flags. And then if we do go to the doctor and mention, hey, I'm experiencing XYZ, they're like, okay, we'll try this or try that. And the reality is you're never really getting to the root of the problem. So the red flags are going to keep getting greater and greater and greater until eventually either physically we are completely incapable of moving forward and things have to be addressed. I still find that more often than less, no matter how bad the diagnosis, there's still a lot of resistance to diving into the emotional and the trauma pieces that keep re-triggering the physical ailments because of that thought process that's constantly going. One of the things I tell individuals, stress, right? Stress is such a key component to our life. And the reality is most people are so disconnected from themselves, they don't even recognize their perception of stress and how that perception of stress is actually having a huge impact on their physical and mental well-being. And so they think, no, it's just I've got GERD. Well, the reason that you have GERD is because you're in this constant worry cycle. So you're constantly stimulating the production of cortisol, suppressing other hormones that allow your body to rest and digest appropriately. And so I'll do little experiments with people to kind of prove to them, how much environment plays a role. But anyway, back to the physical part of ailments presenting themselves in the body. Can you talk to me a little more about that?
Yeah, I'm very much, Heather, a proponent of, and this is one of the definitions of holistic that I kind of apply. It's the interconnection between mind and body and the interconnectedness with the belief that there is a driving symptom, and very early on when I first was became interested in psychology, which is as long as I can remember. And I entered into training, like more official from high school and then college, undergrad. I was always really surprised that there was never any talk about the way I conceptualized that at that time is prevention, right? Why aren't we talking about stopping these things? So that's the same conversation, because what we would be talking about is what's driving the symptoms. And similar to you, I call it the Band-Aid model. And I think that applies in the traditional psychology field too, right? We Band-Aid things. We kind of just cover the symptom and believe then it goes away, and it doesn't. And, I'm someone who went through that conventional system and tried all of those Band-Aid approaches. I'm also someone, so on a personal side of things, my mother, whom I define as chronically ill because she has been my whole life, whether it was with physical symptoms or emotional symptoms, right? She's one of those cases that there's never like the diagnosis, right? The thing that there's been many, I should say, but never the thing, right? And because as far as I see it, it's my mom's past, it's her trauma, it's her suppressed emotions, it's her narratives and her way of being as a result of her trying to cope with things that she couldn't cope with that have caused all these symptoms. So I relate on a very personal level and obviously have, my own attachment, traumas, if you will, having that mother that I have had, right? So I understand. So same thing, back to my dark night of the soul. I started to faint. I started to forget names and sentences. Mine were very cognitive, which again, symptomatically, I thought so, could have looked like something actually happening, maybe in my brain.
Right.
I too came to understand, for me, I was living in a wash of cortisol since before I was even a separate human, since I was in my mom's belly. I have a chronically anxious mother, right? So I really began, and when I, kind of went into research and made some lifestyle changes, same thing, right? I had to understand what was driving it, all of the imbalances in my body and my hormones and my neurotransmitters that come along with it, and also in my nervous system. And I talk about that a lot, because a lot of our stuckness is because we're stuck in a nervous system response. Either we're in that hyperactive fight or flight, as a lot of us know it, the sympathetic, or some of us get stuck in the hypoactive parasympathetic, right? Not fight or flight, the almost shut down place. So my point of bringing all of this up is, if we're trying to treat, like traditionally we have been in at least the mental wellness field, just speaking from my experience, the mind, without looking at the body, we're not going to actually resolve those underlying symptoms, because a lot of the stuckness is because our body is so imbalanced based on, again, those past typically emotional experiences we've had.
Right. Oh, Nicole. Oh, my whole body is just buzzing with excitement.
Resonating. We're resonating. I love it.
The reality is, as a registered dietitian nutritionist, I've had to take my practice and, I've had to invest in so much more learning outside of the curriculum that I was educated within, because I don't align with the system. It doesn't work. And so I knew that I needed to become a registered dietitian so I would have the authority to work with medical nutrition therapy, but do it based on the principles and the practices that actually work to yield the results. And I feel that this is where people have so much cognitive dissonance come into play, because these practices that we're promoting to individuals are so outside the box of what our Western medical system has been developed upon, that people are just in denial. There's no way, if I just address my traumas from childhood, that my MS is going to go away, And the reality is, it is. More often than less, we can get these really horrific diseases managed and eradicated by really truly diving in, going and setting the small goals and really building that foundation in order to support total health and wellness. I have devoted my entire life to holistic practices because I have been able to utilize them to my benefit and completely change my life, completely change the outcome of my life. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for that. I want everybody to experience that. And so sometimes a lot of frustration comes into play when I'm talking with individuals about how they can truly heal. And they're like, just give me a meal plan. And I'm like, bitch, a meal plan isn't gonna work. I can give you 100 meal plans and you're never going to follow them, because life happens and you don't know how to navigate through those ebbs and flows that are triggered through emotion. And so I find myself, that's just my own little personal, I get so frustrated because what I say goes against the common practices of what most nutritionists, dietitians are practicing. And I have such a thorough understanding of the neurosystem and how it all begins with a single thought. Literally, our thoughts are the most powerful resource tool that we have available to us. And so perception truly is reality. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. We are so, and I feel so impassioned like you do. So I knew I had to, and one of the two big inspirations when I first went on Instagram, almost 2 years ago now at this point. Oh my gosh, I just celebrated 2-year anniversary. It's wild. Just occurred to me in this moment. Who knew? It was July, and Jesus, we're almost halfway through July. Anyway, so I wanted to speak this truth because I was not changed. I'm still changing.
Yes.
I was evolving though. Again, breaking down these beliefs and these barriers that I couldn't. I knew I wanted to speak about that and I wanted to share that. I had no awareness or expectation of what would happen and I was scared to on a lot of levels, but didn't know what would happen when I put my message out there. That was my one intention. My other intention was the hope that maybe one or two people, I never had any awareness that it would be the amount that it is now, would resonate. And I would find what I was wanting, which was a community of people who understood and could talk this language, right? And I share that because I agree with you. And so I was offering, other tools, other options. Never once though am I bad mouthing what was the traditional. There's a time and a place, and there are going to be people that believe about the conventional system, beliefs that I don't share. And I'm fine. I respect that. I want everyone to find their own truth from the inside. And I found one version. And so I put that out there. And there is a lot of, when things are, and I had to go through my own almost like mourning period.
Yeah.
I mean, here I am. I was dedicated to this model, that psychoanalytic training. I thought I was going to sign up for another 4 years and become what's called an analyst. Like I really believed in that. Right. So I would be lying if I said that I just was like, oh, that doesn't work. Off I go. There was a big part of me that was mourning this identity, that was mourning this old belief system. And I knew that there was another way or additional tools or, things that we can do outside of that therapy, that I still go get support, find the person that can help you. Also know though, that might not be enough, that there might be these daily shifts that you have to make. So it's not that I'm tearing down. I'm just trying to offer and build, other opportunities. And you're right. It comes with a lot of dissonance. I had it myself. It's hard to open up our perception.
Right.
It is. We become stuck in those realities. And obviously very soon after I started to share this, it was so validating to see people that I didn't even interact with that just were like, oh, I heard you post about this and I've been doing it since. And my life's starting to look different. For me, that was affirmation enough that these tools were needed, were helpful, and were resonating. And of course, now the rest is history. 2 years later, we do have what is quite literally a movement. And the gift of that is getting to connect with other humans like you, Heather, who have been doing this. Because there's so many of us out there that through our own healing, through our own questioning, through our own journeys, we've come to find another way. And now one of my big messages is just creating the flexibility for people to share their own truths and their own stories, and equipping people with the tools internally to sift through, to say, okay, this resonates and makes sense. And, I don't like to, acknowledge this, but that's true. And you know what? This doesn't fit. I just want to empower a human to make their own decisions. Because back to that meal plan, you provide a meal plan. Not only would I take issue with how universal it could be really for everyone, but that's still something external. What happens when that meal plan doesn't come in your email box? What happens when that item isn't available? Do you have nothing else to rely on? Or can we develop the internal reservoir of resilience and self-knowledge that, like you were saying, we can ride the waves of being human for the rest of our life? That's what I'm looking to do. That's what empowerment is for me. It's not outsourcing to external things.
Yes. I feel so in alignment with that statement. I have so much respect for you as a professional and a personal individual. I just think that all of the work you're doing is so amazing, and it's beautiful to see just in such a small time what has occurred over the last 2 years for you and the community that you have been able to create and support. I love your Instagram. Every time something pops up in my feed, I'm always like, fuck, yep, that's what I needed today. Thank you so much. It just always seems like on point. No matter what the content is, you can always relate some piece of it to something you're personally experiencing. And again, it goes back to that perception, right? Perception is our reality. And so when we discover that we have the ability, we can't control our circumstances, but we can control how we choose to respond to those circumstances. That's where our power is. That's where the most beautiful things actually occur. And that's such a powerful, empowering moment when people can actually connect with that and recognize that they actually are acting in a new way through choice. I remember I had a horrible, horrible divorce. And I remember for years, just waiting, like, oh, today's going to be the day I'm going to wake up and be able to forgive. And one day I was driving in the vehicle and there was a radio show on, and the two hosts were talking about the concept that forgiveness was a choice, not a feeling. And I remember pulling my car over to the side of the road and going, what the fuck? You need to tell me that the entire time I could have just chose to forgive, and I've been desperately waiting for this feeling, and I was so addicted to all of the emotions that fed me. I was never going to wake up and feel ready.
Magically, right.
No, I literally had to make the choice. And so that was such a profound moment for me. I'll never forget that. Like, oh, wow, I get to just choose. Oh my God, that's amazing. So
that's, I think, a really resonating one, Heather. That also looks like, right, if I find this relationship, once I get this job, when I move, I mean, the list really goes on in all of the ways we're waiting for that external shift to change how we internally feel. I know I've sat in that wait game, and I would do that with my partners. If I only found the person who really saw me, who really emotionally connected to me. Right. How familiar does it sound? How could they? I wasn't emotionally connected to me. Of course I never found that person. I had to change first.
Yeah. Oh, I had a history of, narcissistic codependent relationships that stemmed from way early childhood. My parents got divorced when I was young, and I thought that all of my abandonment and rejection issues stemmed from my father not really being present in my life as a young child. One of my very first memories, I remember being about 4, sitting on my front porch with my suitcase, waiting with my brother for our dad to show up, and he, wouldn't come. And mom would have to say, come on, guys, you got to come inside. It's dark. Dad's not coming. And so I went up to Mount Shasta and spent 16 weeks of self-healing, isolation. I went into isolation. It was the first time in my entire life I've ever been alone. It was after a final horrific narcissistic relationship ending. And I finally realized, okay, I got to do something. I can't keep doing this. And as I started to get quiet and observe and be alone with myself, one day I was sitting in front of the mirror putting my makeup on, and this voice came in and it said, hey, you know how you think all of your issues with abandonment and rejection actually are associated with your dad? And I was like, yeah. And it's like, well, what if I told you otherwise? And I was like, I'm listening. Please enlighten me. And ultimately what this voice, whether it was my higher self, my inner child, whoever it was that was speaking to me, ultimately addressed me and basically said, when I was 9 months old, that my needs were not met as an infant. My mother was incapable of nurturing me because she had just gone through a tragic loss of her brother dying. She was pregnant with my younger brother, going through this marriage with my alcoholic and drug addicted dad, codependent mom, codependent father, had to take care of her brother. So she was literally incapable of nurturing me as that 9-month-old child. And so after I had this epiphany and this revelation of how early these abandonment rejection issues actually stemmed from, it allowed me to see my mother in a completely different, perspective. I had so much compassion and so much empathy for her. And it just allowed me to dissolve all of the anger and all of the, things that I had to experience as a child that I was resentful for. It just all disappeared. And with that mindfulness and understanding that, I wasn't being nurtured as this small child. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my mom's fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just circumstances. Having that was so powerful that it literally allowed me to cut that cord of codependency and narcissistic relationships. Done,
Yeah.
So, but I truly believe that if I wouldn't have allowed myself the time to be present and observe, that little voice never would have come and visited me. I still would have never had discovered the root of where that truly resonated from.
Well, I want to honor you, Heather, for allowing that voice in, because that's hard.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of us don't sit with ourselves because we don't necessarily want to quote unquote see or hear or feel about the truth. And when it is offered, whether it's a little voice in your head, I know for a little bit in the beginning of my healing, it was a little voice called my partner who was objective, like she's not me. So she on multiple occasions would just notice certain things. You know, I noticed, you know, when you go to your families, you're just a little bit irritable and you're just a little different than you are. Just, you know, she was very gentle.
Mm-hmm.
No, who the hell are you to tell me that? That's absolutely not true. You're not right. So I commend, so in that silence, which is the first hard step, whether again, it's our voice telling us, people around us seeing for ourselves, radical honesty with the self, right? Looking at that is hard. Mm-hmm. And you said something else really important that is a core, I think, component of healing, which is what I call depersonalizing those events. Mm-hmm. Because when we are in childhood, one of those cognitive states that we live in, that our mind is only capable of, is something that's called egocentrism. Mm-hmm. And it's not until we're, I don't know the exact age, say like, you know, at around 9, 10, where we start to begin to shift out of that. Mm-hmm. But when we're in that state, our mind can only offer explanations for things that happen in our world. I'm really simplifying this, mm-hmm. as meaning as about us, right? Mm-hmm. So when mom, dad doesn't come, it's some version of, or when they do come and they're angry, we tell ourselves some version of a story that it's because of us. We were a bad girl or a bad boy or a bad child, whatever it is, right? Because we're not capable of having that greater perspective of understanding. So for your story, right, that mom was grieving, you know, and not able to care. I mean, it sounds silly to think of a 6 and 9-month-old Bill. You can't, right? So in your world, mom wasn't there and it was logged and registered. So for me, same thing. My sister, who was also chronically ill, had a pretty serious surgery. I think I was on or around 3. Mm-hmm. And my family, my mom, my dad, obviously, she was in the hospital for weeks at a time, right? I don't remember, but I can imagine, you know, like I probably too wasn't fully nurtured and cared for in that time. And again, my childhood mind probably made some sense of it. It's because I'm not good enough. I'm not enough for them to want to. So as we age, we become more able to see the bigger picture, mm-hmm. and to understand other factors that were influencing our parents, including what was happening in that given moment. Yeah. As well as their past too, and their conditioning and what they learned, right? So this is how things transmit intergenerationally. Yeah. However, as an adult, right, when we can come to that awareness, this isn't to say not to allow what is very rightfully for many of us anger and hurt when we do become radically honest, right? You might be upset. You might feel negatively about parents and caregivers. It's not for me to, I'm not saying don't acknowledge that. Absolutely. And then on the other side of that, for many of us, if we can expand and see and understand, you know, maybe all of those other factors that were influencing our parents' choice in that moment, now maybe we can extend that compassion. Doesn't mean, again, if we have abusive relationships with caretakers, I'm not saying we have to have a relationship with these people. Right. We can do all of this from afar, right? But that component of it can be very healing. Yeah. Where I can see my parent as human, and I don't have to own that brokenness anymore, because it was not about me then, and it's not about me now, and I can understand a bit more.
Yeah. You know, I had an opportunity, I needed to validate this information. And so of course, you know, I found a time to kind of gently bring the subject up with my mother, whom historically is a very defensive, reactive individual. So, you know, asking this kind of question, which could be potentially a threat against her character, was very scary, but I knew that I had to do it. Mm-hmm. And so as I started basically kind of, you know, reliving the story I just told you to her, I saw this sense of like, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but this thing overcame her. It was almost like this freedom, this horrible secret that she had been carrying as a burden, and all of this guilt and pain and suffering that she had done around not being able to nurture me at 9 months old because of her own personal grief, like dissipated. Mm-hmm. It was like this, not only was it a healing moment for me, but it was also a healing moment for her to forgive and let go and like take a breath and we can finally be honest and free here, you know? And that was a very pivotal moment in our relationship and with my ability to communicate my truths and not be in fear of that judgment or the criticism or whatever might come from it. I just needed to express what I had identified, and then either she validated it or not. It didn't really matter to me, but what actually transpired was way more beautiful and greater than I ever imagined would have. So.
Yeah, I'm really happy you're able to gain that healing. And you said something important in there. Because those of us who won't get that validation, who won't get our caregiver relaxing into the truth or acknowledging it, even I know I don't necessarily get that. You know, what is important, because I talk a lot about realities and having them invalidated in the past. What is most important is our validation, is leaving the conversation where maybe painfully you do have that caregiver who doesn't relax and remit and say you're right, who says you're staunchly wrong, maybe even becomes angry. What's most important is leaving that secure in that was the reality for you, and finding your way to heal even in absence of that other person validating. And a lot of us struggle with that because we come from a history of needing those things, those people, those confirmations externally, again, right outside of ourselves, to validate our reality. So again, it's developing that internal reservoir that we're talking about, where I can validate myself. I don't need you to fully agree with me in this. That's what it was for me. And we can still move forward or not. Right. And that's where we have choice.
Absolutely. And this in itself is like a whole topic and show that we could do about in terms of just like gaslighting and denying someone's perception of what they are experiencing. And I see this happening so much in the medical system with individuals going to the doctor and saying, I'm having these chronic headaches, my stomach's constantly aching. And they're like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're totally fine, you know, and making that person
all in your head. I think even sometimes people hear.
And so my heart really goes out to all of the individuals who are truly physically suffering and not getting the answers and the support that they need in order to be able to reverse what is happening and be able to overcome and heal through it in a holistic way. It doesn't always require medication. Sometimes medication is very much needed, but it doesn't mean that it's always going to be a permanent, solution. When we start enacting new behaviors and practices and changing lifestyle, circumstances, more often than less, I see that, medication becomes not necessary for a lot of circumstances. I had one girl who was on 27 medications when her and I met. She had 7 diagnoses along with severe anxiety and depression. And she was 25 years old at the time. And so she had literally identified herself with all of these diagnoses, with all of this drama associated around the illness. And once we were able to get her to release the attachment of the diagnosis, that's when everything completely changed for her. And she, 2 years later, is thriving and doing amazing. And I'm so proud of her. And she's only on 1 prescriptive medication for.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I have chills.
And the reality is, this can be our reality. Anyone can have the same kind of outcome if they choose to think differently about the approach that they need to take. And so, for me, with what you do, that's exactly the whole point, is that the approach is very different than the recommendations that we're seeing amongst most professionals in psychology. And so I just really commend the work that you're doing. And I know that, it was probably initially hard to step outside of that box and say, nope, I'm stepping into my truth. This is what people need. And being able to offer that to them, and then have the kind of support that you have through the community. That's just such a beautiful validation for how badly this is needed.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I don't say this lightly. I truly thank every member of the community, everyone who identifies as a self-healer or ever has once in their life and maybe come back at a later time, and humans like you. I mean, this is why now we're banded together. We have love or hate it, the gift of technology, though it's here, right?
Right.
This is one of the beautiful ways that we can shift the collective and can create, these opportunities and the awarenesses and the support that is necessary. So yes, I show up every day and I pop a little meme up and I write a little caption in there, though it's not just me. It is truly a creation. When I got the book that I'm in the middle of writing, when I received the book contract, I really truly believe it's because of the community. Like, we did this. This is our book. This is our roadmap of healing now. I hope there are many more. And seeing and meeting practitioners like yourself, I know there will be many more. So my sincerest, gratitude. I couldn't have done this without each and every person who resonated and who had the courage to say as much.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's so beautiful. And I think right now, where we're at in this time, that this work is the work that is going to be essential as we evolve as a society. And through these, we're in a major paradigm shift right now. Things are definitely shifting. Things are going to have to change in many ways. And either individuals are going to be stuck and they're not going to evolve, or they're going to have to put the work in, meet that resistance head on in order to come out on the other side and just truly thrive, and be able to step into, their gifts, their abilities, embrace their happiness and joy that they innately have within them. And most of us think that, that's something that we have to go out and find, and it's right here. Like, it's literally right here. And when we can turn within and embrace that and know that we're never truly alone, we have everything we need. And when we are very intentional about the way that we choose to think throughout the day, it's a game changer, just an absolute game changer.
I couldn't agree more. When we return to wholeness that we always were.
Yes.
Right. We just forgot and we just lost sight, and we've created perceptions and beliefs and environments that have not validated that wholeness.
Right.
And now we return home. And I truly thank you, Heather, for the work that you do in the world and helping raise the collective vibration in this way. And this is real. I'm as much as it's difficult in many ways to observe these paradigm shifting and the people being like kind of like stuck still and knowing there's better. It's hard. We're human. Come on over here. Right. We're at a really beautiful time as far as I see it too.
Well, I think
really
that
inspired.
We are at a place in our lifetime where programs are so deeply embedded that we are either going to have to make some hard decisions and say, you know what, I'm going to cut the cord of this programming because this clearly isn't serving me the way that I desire, and start new. I'm just going to take the chance and allow myself, self the gift and opportunity. I have a daughter who's 19 and she's been living in the Midwest going to college, and she's actually going to be moving out here mid-August, and she keeps texting me, I'm just so worried. What if it doesn't, what if this happens and what if this? And all I respond to her with is, but what if it does happen? Like, what if it does work? And then it's silence. Never, she's actually calling me right now. I never get a response back, right? Because she's like, fuck. Oh,
the crickets. I call that the crickets when you say something back and there's
I'm like, but what if it does work out? What if it does? We just got to trust our intuition, listen to that guiding voice that we were all gifted with. And I think that life-changing things can truly occur. So I am so appreciative of your time, and clearly I didn't get to ask all of the questions that I wanted to, but I do want to be respectful. And I know you are a busy woman with all kinds of stuff going on. I'm so excited about your book. When will that be? What's happening with that?
There is the publication date, I think, that is standing strong, even all things COVID, is March 2021.
Excellent.
So it's coming. I'm getting down to the nitty gritty edit phase, and we will see that come to life this spring. I'm so excited.
That's very exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very happy and proud for you and the entire community. So where can all of the listeners find you? How can they follow you, find you, if this is their first introduction to you?
Of course. So come over to my Instagram at the.holistic.psychologist. It is really a main hub, though I also have a Facebook page for all the Facebookers out there, the Holistic Psychologist, and a YouTube, the Holistic Psychologist as well. Videos released every Sunday. I shout out the Instagram because there's a link tree on there with links to that Future Self Journal that I mentioned earlier, always keeping updated on the opening enrollment of the Self Healers Circle, probably this coming fall. So the main hub is the Instagram, though there's all these different modalities. So thank you. Come over. I'm doing the work of healing. I'm putting out content. I'm actually in the process of updating that Future Self Journal. So in the next couple months, when I launch the new website that we've been working on, there'll be a new, nice, shiny version of that journaling. So anyone who's not a journaler listening, like I wasn't, like you aren't, and wants to give a different type of journaling to really help us create change, can go and check that out and get that freebie. And thank you, Heather, for your time and sharing your space and your community with me today.
Oh, thank you. It's been such a pleasure, such a true pleasure.
Thank you so much for spending this time with me on the Think Yourself Healthy podcast. I'm so grateful that you stopped by. If you could just take a minute to share this episode with someone you think who would love it, it would be amazing. Take a screenshot that you've listened to the episode and tag at Think Yourself Healthy and myself at Nutrition Vixen so that I can share it. Leave a review on iTunes to let us know how much you loved being here and what you want to hear next. Until next time, don't forget to think yourself healthy. Thanks again, guys. Bye.